But let me begin in all humility by saying that on the 12th of April, I received a fixed penalty notice relating to an event in Downing Street on the 19th of June 2020. I paid the fine immediately, and I offered the British people a full apology. And I take this opportunity on the first available sitting day to repeat my wholehearted apology to the House. As soon as I received the notice, I acknowledged the hurt and the anger. And I said that people had a right to expect better of their Prime Minister. And I repeat that, Mr. Speaker, again in the House now. Let me also say, not by way of mitigation or excuse, but purely because it explains my previous words in this House, that it did not occur to me then or subsequently that a gathering in the Cabinet room just before a vital meeting on COVID strategy could amount to a breach of the rules. I repeat, that was my mistake, and I apologise for it unreservedly. I respect the outcome of the police investigation, which is still underway. And I can only say that I will respect their decision-making and always take the appropriate steps. And as the House will know, I have already taken significant steps to change the way things work in Number 10. And it is precisely because I know that so many people are angry and disappointed that I feel an even greater sense of obligation to deliver on the priorities of the British people and to respond in the best traditions of our country to Putin's barbaric onslaught against Ukraine. Our Ukrainian friends are fighting for the life of their nation, and they achieved the greatest feat of arms of the 21st century by repelling the Russian assault on Kiev. And the whole House will share my admiration for their heroism and courage. Putin arrogantly assumed that he would capture Kiev in a matter of days. And now the blackened carcasses of his tanks and heavy armour litter the approaches to the capital on both banks of the Dnieper and are smouldering monuments to his failure. Having pulverised the invaders' armoured spearheads, the Ukrainians then counterattacked, and by the 6th of April, Putin had been compelled to withdraw his forces from the entire Kiev region. Britain and our allies supplied some of the weaponry, but it was Ukrainian valour and sacrifice which saved their capital. I travelled to Kiev myself on the 9th of April, the first G7 leader to visit since the invasion, and I spent 4 hours with President Volodymyr Zelensky, the indomitable leader of a nation fighting for survival who gives the roar of a lion-hearted people. I assured him of the implacable resolve of the United Kingdom, shared across this House, to join with our allies and give his brave people the weapons they need to defend themselves. When the President and I went for an impromptu walk through central Kiev, we happened upon a man who immediately expressed his love for Britain and the British people. And he was generous enough to say, quite unprompted, I should reassure the House, I will tell my children and grandchildren they must always remember that Britain helped us. But the urgency is even greater now because Putin has regrouped his forces and launched a new offensive in the Donbass. We knew this danger would come. And when I welcomed President Duda of Poland to Downing Street on the 7th of April and Chancellor Scholz the following day, we discussed exactly how we could provide the arms that Ukraine would desperately need to counter Putin's next onslaught. On the 12th of April, I spoke to President Biden to brief him on my visit to Kiev and how we will intensify our support for President Zelensky, and I proposed that our long-term goal must be to strengthen and fortify Ukraine to the point where Russia will never dare to invade again. Just as our foreign policy must look to the long term, the same is true of this government's domestic priorities. And as we face the economic aftershocks of COVID and the consequences of Russian aggression, that is above all in tackling the impact on British energy prices and on consumers and on family bills. And that's why we're spending over £9 billion to help families struggling with their bills. We're helping families to insulate their homes and reduce costs, and to end our dependence on Putin's oil and gas, and to ensure that energy is cheaper in the long term. We published on the 7th of April a new strategy to make British energy greener, more affordable and more secure. We will massively expand offshore wind, and in the country that split the atom, we will build a new reactor not every decade, but every year. This government is joining with our allies to face down Putin's aggression abroad while addressing the toughest problems at home, helping millions of families with the cost of living, making our streets safer and funding the NHS to clear the COVID backlog. My job is to work every day to make the British people safer, more secure and more prosperous, and that is what I will continue to do, and I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
What a joke. Even now, as the latest mealy-mouthed apology stumbles out of one side of his mouth, a new set of deflections and distortions pour from the other. But the damage is already done. The public have made up their mind. They don't believe a word the Prime Minister says. They know what he is. As ever with this Prime Minister, those close to him find themselves ruined, and the institutions he vows to protect damaged. Good ministers forced to walk away from public service, the Chancellor's career up in flames, and the leader of the Scottish Conservatives rendered pathetic. For all those unfamiliar with this Prime Minister's career, this isn't some fixable glitch in the system. It's the whole point. It's what he does. It's who he is. He knows he's dishonest and incapable of changing, so he drags everybody else down with him. The more people debase themselves, parroting his...
Order! I can't hear what's being said because you're making jokes. Mr. Fabricant, I'm all right. Keir Starmer.
You look desperate.
What I would say is I think the leader said dishonest. I don't think that's an appropriate word to be... I think I will make... We don't want to talk about breaking rules, do we? I don't think that's a good time to discuss. I just say, I think if he just withdraws that and works around it, I'm sure that with the knowledge that he's gained over many, many years, he can use appropriate words that is in keeping with good temperate language of this House. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I respect that ruling from the Chair. The Prime Minister knows what he is. And so he drags everyone else down with him. The more people debase themselves, parroting his absurd defences, the more the public will believe all politicians are the same, all as bad as each other, and that suits this Prime Minister just fine. Some members opposite seem oblivious to the Prime Minister's game. Some know what he's up to, but are too weak to act. But others are gleefully playing the part the Prime Minister cast for them. A minister on the radio this morning saying it's the same as a speeding ticket. No, it's not. No one has ever broken down in tears because they couldn't drive faster than 20 miles an hour outside a school. Don't insult the public with this nonsense. But, Mr. Speaker, as it happens, the last minister who got a speeding ticket and then lied about it ended up in prison, and I know because I prosecuted him. And last week, we were treated to a grotesque spectacle. One of the Prime Minister's loyal supporters accusing teachers and nurses of drinking in the staff room during lockdown. Members opposite can associate themselves with that if they want. But those of us who take pride in our NHS workers, our teachers, and every other key worker who got us through those dark days will never forget their contempt.
Yeah,
Plenty didn't agree with every rule the Prime Minister wrote, but they followed them nonetheless. Because in this country, we respect others. We put the greater good above narrow self-interest, and we understand that the rules apply to all of us. This morning, I spoke to John Robinson, a constituent of the member for Lichfield. I want to tell you his story. When his wife died of COVID, John and his family obeyed the Prime Minister's rules. He didn't see her in hospital. He didn't hold her hand as she died. Their daughters and grandchildren drove 100 miles up the motorway, clutching a letter from the funeral director in case they were questioned by the police. They didn't have a service in the church. John's son-in-law stayed away because he would have been the forbidden seventh mourner. Doesn't the Prime Minister realise that John would have given the world to hold his dying wife's hand, even if it was just for 9 minutes? But he didn't, because he followed the Prime Minister's rules. Rules that we now know the Prime Minister blithely, repeatedly and deliberately ignored.
Yes.
After months of insulting excuses, today's half-hearted apology will never be enough for John Robinson. If the Prime Minister had any respect for John and the millions like him who sacrificed everything to follow the rules, he'd resign. But he won't, because he doesn't respect John. He doesn't respect the sacrifice of the British public. He is a man without shame. Looking past the member for Lichfield and the nodding dogs in the cabinet, there are many decent, honourable members on the benches opposite who do respect John Robinson, who do respect the British public. They know the damage the Prime Minister is doing. They know things can't go on as they are. And they know it's their responsibility to bring an end to this shameful chapter. Today I urge them once again, don't follow in the slipstream of an out-of-touch, out-of-control Prime Minister. Put their conscience first. Put their country first. Put John Robinson first. And remove the Prime Minister from office.
Yes.
Bring decency, honesty and integrity back into our politics. And stop the denigration of everything that this country stands for. Thank you.